All right. Hey, good morning, everybody. It is Wednesday morning, May the 22nd, 2024. This morning, we're going to just be looking at one psalm, but we're going to be looking at the psalm with the story that is the context of it. We're going to be looking at Psalm 52. The title of today's Daily Manna is Religious Righteousness versus Real Righteousness. Religious righteousness versus real righteousness. Um, when we talk about religion, what I'm referring to is ultimately what is can look on the outside. It's something that has to do with an outer look of piety, righteousness. It's often what we associate with being godly, is this outer look. So at the time of Yeshua, those who were the religious, often we talk about the Pharisees and the Sadducees, they were in the places of religious leadership, and they were focused on really the outward, the external expression of walking out your faith. And what can happen is that something that begins with good intentions can slowly morph into something that it wasn't intended to be. I'll give you an example. There is the command in the Ten Commandments: don't take the Lord's name in vain. Don't lift up the name of the Lord in emptiness. And so it was determined long ago that, well, we don't want to use the Lord's name in vain, so we simply won't say his name, right? We don't want to lift up his name in emptiness, so we won't say his name. And so because of that, it was determined, rather than saying the name Yod He Vav He, the name that is now we consider the ineffable, unpronounceable name, the name that the Lord had actually given when Moses says, well, who do I tell them sent me? The Lord gives them this name. But so now we say Adonai, and we one of the reasons that we continue to not use the name of the Lord in that way is not because somehow we think that we're taking it in vain, but because in the ears of Jewish unbelievers, it makes it difficult to talk about the gospel for them to actually hear us when we would use the name of God in that way. And so Adonai becomes a substitute for his name. But the issue of don't lift up the Lord's name in emptiness doesn't have to do with just the pronunciation of his name. The idea that, well, I'm not going to say his name and therefore I can never take his name in vain. You're missing it. You're missing the heart of the command. Don't lift up his character. Don't lift up the character of the Lord, his reputation, devoid of what his character is about. So that's why in Jeremiah chapter 7, when the Lord says, this is the in the house that's called by my name, but there's nothing, you say this is the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, but there's nothing going on in the house called by my reputation that is associated with who I am. If you want to do what is right, he begins to talk about take care of the widows and orphans, begin to do righteousness, begin to do justice, but instead what you've done is you've made my house a den of thieves. You've missed the point entirely. In the New Covenant scriptures, here you see, when we've talked about this on a number of occasions, we've seen Yeshua will heal on the Sabbath, will heal on the Shabbat, and they're watching him closely to see, the religious are watching closely to see if he's going to violate the Shabbat. And so they've missed the heart of Shabbat, and they've reduced it to checking off religious boxes. So Psalm 52, when we come into Psalm 52, it deals with the psalm is connected to a story that we read about in 1 Samuel chapters 21 and 22. And that's a story that Yeshua actually addresses when his disciples are picking heads of grain on the Shabbat. He points back to this passage in 1 Samuel chapter 21. So we're going to be looking at those passages together today. And we can find ourselves, if we're not careful, doing things that on the outward look legalistically righteous. They look technically righteous. And that's what we'll see today in the story. And sometimes the thing that someone would look and go, look what he did, that was unrighteous, is actually the thing that, because of its motivation, because of the heart behind it, is actually the thing that is pleasing to the Lord. And for those of us who grew up with a very legalistic mindset that the Lord continues to break off, there are aspects of this that can be challenging. Okay, let me jump into it because you're going to be like, what are you talking about? So when we look at Psalm 52, Psalm 52 is structured in such a way that it, in many ways, you know how Psalm chapter 1, or Psalm 1, talks about the one that compares those who stand in the way of sinners and sit in the seat of the ungodly and walk in and stand in the counsel of the ungodly and of the wicked, walk in that path. It compares them to those who desire the way of the Lord. They're like a tree planted by streams of living water. Streams of water. Well, this passage has a similar contrast where the opening talks about the one whose way is against God, the first several verses. And so verses 3 through 6 in the Hebrew Bible. In your English Bible, whenever there's a superscription up top that kind of gives the context, that's not given verse numbers in the English Bibles. It is in the Hebrew Bible, so that's why there's a verse discrepancy at times. So in the English Bible, it'll be verses 1 through 4 that talk about the one who's against God, and then verse 5 is sort of the centerpiece that deals with how God acts, and then verses 6 through 9 is the way of the righteous. So in the Hebrew Bible, it's verses 3 through 6, and the centerpiece is verse 7, and then the way of the righteous is verses 8 through 11. And so we open up verse 1 of Psalm 52. It is a contemplative song of David. When Doeg the Edomite came and reported to Saul, telling him, David went to Ahimelech's house. So let's look at this story. This is in 1 Samuel chapter 21, beginning in verse 1. In the preceding chapter, 1 Samuel chapter 20, is the famous story of where Jonathan and David, Jonathan says, okay, you go out and hide in the field, and I'm going to be, what I shout will to tell you whether my dad wants to kill you or not. And they work out their whole deal. So it's determined, oh, David, you need to run. And so 1 Samuel 21:1 says, Then David got up and left while Jonathan returned to the town. David went to Nob to Ahimelech the Cohen, the priest. Ahimelech was afraid to meet David. So David said, and so he said, Ahimelech said to David, Why are you alone and no one with you? David said to Ahimelech the Cohen, The king has commissioned me with a matter and told me, Let no one know anything about the mission on which I am sending you or with what I have commissioned you. So I have directed the young men to such and such a place. So now, what do you have on hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread or whatever can be found. All right, so we hear this story. That's not true. What David just said isn't true. King Saul did not send him. Ahimelech is concerned. David's now there. Apparently we find out he has men with him. And he says, well, I'm on a secret mission from Saul, and these guys are hungry. They desperately need food. So the priest answered David, verse 5, saying, There is no common bread on hand, but there is consecrated bread, so long as the young men have kept themselves from women. Verse 6, Of course women have been kept from us, as on previous campaigns, David answered the Cohen. So the young men's vessels were holy, though it was an ordinary mission. How much more so will their vessels be holy today? All right, so so he's running for his life, and so David is like, we need to eat, um, and and so there's no reason for Ahimelech to doubt David, so he takes David at his word. And the only bread that's available is not normal bread; it's consecrated bread. It's bread which there are ritual restrictions on, and so the bread's holy. Those who eat it must not be profane or ritually impure. And in this case, the ritual impurity is defined as having had recent sexual relations. And so he says, no, we haven't. We're on a mission, so we've stayed. Nobody's done that. So now, again, this is the passage that Yeshua points to like we read it in the Gospels. In Mark chapter 2, verse 25, Yeshua said when they said, hey, why are your guys doing what they're not supposed to do, eating these on the Shabbat? They're taking the heads of grain. Yeshua said to them, Mark 2:25, haven't you ever read what David did when he was in need? And he and those with him became hungry? How he entered into the house of God when Abiathar was Kohen Gadol and ate the showbread, which is permitted only for the Kohanim to eat, and gave some even to those who were with him. Verse 27, then he said to them, Shabbat was made for man and not man for Shabbat. So the Son of Man is Lord even of Shabbat. And so what Yeshua is pointing to is the nature of Shabbat. So at the time of Yeshua, there were additional commands surrounding Shabbat. Saying, okay, we don't want to violate Shabbat. So what does it mean to work on the Shabbat? And so since the exile, there had been in the Talmud and there were categories of work that were created. Well, if we got to determine what is work, and so all of these categories of work were created, and so which were not necessarily scriptural. They were man-made as sort of putting a fence around the law. If God said don't do this, well then He says, don't violate the Shabbat. Well, what does it mean to not work? So if we make sure all of these things, now we've made all of these things that are work. If you don't do these, then you're sure not to violate the Shabbat. And so now those man-made regulations had become synonymous with God's regulations, and they weren't. And so the Lord, Yeshua, is pointing them back to the heart of Shabbat. And so Shabbat is for rest, and what the Lord desires is for life and for sustenance and for wholeness. And so here, David is on the run for his life. He's got his men with him. They're hungry. And he's gone there, and he tells a story that is not true. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. And then he wants his men fed. And verse 7 of 1 Samuel 21, so the priest, the Cohen, gave him consecrated bread, for there was no bread there but the bread of the presence, which was taken out from the presence of Adonai in order to replace it with hot bread on the day it was taken away. Verse 8, now one of Saul's servants was there that day, the detained before Adonai. Now we don't know exactly what that is referring to. He's detained. It's a word that's used for imprisoned, detained in the presence of the Lord. His name was Doeg the Edomite, chief of Saul's shepherds. Then David, and we find out later, David saw him. David said to Ahimelech, isn't there a spear or sword on hand? For I didn't take my sword or my weapons with me because the king's mission was urgent. Cohen said, the sword of Goliath, the Philistine, whom you killed in the valley of Elah, it's here, wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. If you want to take it for yourself, take it, for there's nothing else here. There's nothing like it, David said. Give it to me. Verse 11, then David got up and fled that day from Saul and went to Achish, king of Gath. So we're going to skip ahead. He goes to the land of the Philistines. That's where he pretended to drool and pretend to be a crazy man to find shelter. He's on the run for his life. Skip ahead to 1 Samuel 22 to give us the context here for Psalm 52. 1 Samuel 22:9, then Doeg the Edomite, who was standing among Saul's courtiers, answered and said, Saul's trying to determine, where is David? Where is David at? And finally Doeg speaks up. He says, I saw the son of Jesse coming to Nob, to Ahimelech, son of Ahitub. And he inquired of Adonai for him, gave him provisions, and gave him the sword of Goliath, the Philistine. True. These are true statements. I saw him. He came there. He gave him provisions. We don't know in terms of he inquired of the Lord for him, but there's no... I don't know necessarily that's an untrue statement. He gave him the sword of Goliath. True. Okay, so David told some things that weren't true. And Doeg here's saying some things that are true. Then the king sent word to summon the Cohen, the priest, son of Ahitub, and all the Kohanim of his father's house who were in Nob. So they all came to the king. Listen now, son of Ahitub, Saul said. Here I am, my lord, he said. Verse 13. Then Saul said to him, why have you conspired against me, you and the son of Jesse, by giving him bread and a sword and inquiring of God for him, that he should rise against me by lying in ambush, as is the case today? Verse 14, then Ahimelech answered the king, saying, who among all your servants is as trusted as David, the king's son-in-law, a captain of the royal guard and honored in your house? Just today I began to inquire of God for him. Far be it from the king to accuse his servant, to accuse me or anyone of my father's house, for your servant, I don't know anything about all of what you're talking about, whether little or much. Verse 16, but the king said, you will surely die, Ahimelech, you and all your father's house. Then the king ordered the guards attending him, turn around, tells the guards, turn around and kill the priests, kill the Kohanim of Adonai, for they are in cahoots with David. For they knew that he was running away, but did not inform me. But the servants of the king were not willing to raise their hand to assault the priests of Adonai. Verse 18, so the king said to Doeg, you, turn around and kill the Kohanim. So Doeg the Edomite turned and fell upon the Kohanim, and on that day killed 85 men who wore the linen ephod. Nob, the town of the Kohanim, he struck with the edge of the sword, men and women, children and infants, oxes, asses, and sheep with the edge of the sword. So Saul gives the command. Doeg says, excuse me, I saw David. He went and the priest, he went to Ahimelech's house. He inquired of the Lord. And actually we do find out, Ahimelech says, I just inquired of the Lord on his behalf today, but I don't know what you're talking about. Why would I doubt anything? And Saul says, you're dying. You're going to die. It doesn't matter what the priest has said. He's so driven. He's into madness that he's so paranoid that he's like, you're going to die today. He tells his men to kill all of these priests. They are like, we're not raising our hands against the priests of the Lord. So he turns to the Edomite, to Doeg the Edomite, and says, you do it. And he doesn't. No problem. And the irony here is that when the Lord had told Saul concerning the Amalekites in 1 Samuel 15 to utterly destroy them, it's called a harem, an utter destruction, men and women, children, cattle, and Saul didn't. Remember, he didn't kill the King Agag. He kept the best of the sheep and the cattle to sacrifice. He made it compromise. So, and it says he was unwilling to do it. But here now, if it affects him, Saul suddenly is willing. He's not concerned about slaughtering everyone in this priestly town, in this town of priests. He's not concerned about slaughtering men and women and children and donkeys and oxen, and right. Doeg went beyond. He did it all, but as much as he is the in wickedness, indeed he is. Saul is the king giving these commands. We continue to read verse 20. It says, yet one of the sons of Ahimelech, son of Ahitub, named Abiathar, escaped and fled to David. Abiathar told David that Saul had slain the Lord's Kohanim, his priests. Then David said to Abiathar, I knew on that day when Doeg the Edomite was there that he would surely tell Saul, I have brought about the death of all the people of your father's house. Stay with me and fear not, for the one who is seeking my life is seeking your life too. But with me you will be safe. And so David is like, what he expresses, I knew it. I saw him there, and I knew he would tell Saul. I knew it. And it's my fault. It's my fault all your family's dead. He wants to kill you, and it's my fault. Like David that's his heart. He takes responsibility for what happened, right? Which is a complete contrast to Saul, who is irresponsible in the extreme. He doesn't take responsibility for any of it. So that's the story behind Psalm 52 that compares the wicked to the righteous. Right? This is what's happened, and it's so awful. The priests didn't know. They just took David at his word. And so we read here, Psalm 52. So this is the background of the story when Doeg the Edomite told them about what happened. Verse 3 says, why do you brag about evil, mighty man? Hagibor. Why are you praising, boasting in wickedness, mighty one? God's chesed, the chesed, the love, the covenant loyalty and love of God is the whole day or every day. Now, this psalm opens with a question, and usually why, then when it's like why, it's usually directed at God. Why, O Lord? But the question here is addressed to mighty one, to a mighty one. And typically this word gibor, it refers to a great hero or warrior. Just like in Isaiah chapter 9, verses 5 and 6, where it says, unto us a child is born, a son is given, his name will be called a wonderful counselor, mighty God. That's El Gibor, God of might, God of who is the mighty one. And so here, this one is Gibor, a mighty man. And it would usually be someone who's held in high esteem in the community. But this one might be strong and mighty, but he's hardly held in high esteem. And as the psalm plays out, we learn that this mighty one uses his words the way a warrior would use weapons, right? His tongue is like a sharp razor. He has words that devour. Look at verse 4. O mighty one, your tongue plots destruction, or it calculates destruction, like a sharp razor working deceit. So words are not the weapon of a foreign invader, right? The foreign invader has different language often. The words are the weapons of someone who's close, and who's in the community, and whose love of deception basically slashes at the community like a sword. And as we go into the next verses 5 and 6, this mighty one is accused of, he loves evil, he loves lying, he loves words that destroy more than he loves what is good and righteous. Now, so you say, well, this is clearly about Doeg the Edomite. He loves lying. But someone could make the legalistic argument that in the Doeg David story of 1 Samuel 21 and 22, someone could say, well, David's the one that told deception, that told the lie, and Doeg told the truth. Technically, right? This technically thing, it deals with the outer surface, the religious view of righteousness. Well, he lied. David lied. He wasn't sent there on a mission by Saul. And Doeg, he just told the truth. Well, what was I doing? Right? David had not been sent by the king. David said, I've been sent by the king. Not true. But why? Why did David say that? Why did David tell Ahimelech that he'd been sent by the king? Well, he says it to protect not just himself, he says it to protect the priests. To protect them. If he gives them this information, then he makes them responsible for this, and he doesn't want them to be held responsible for it. He wants to make sure his men are fed. So his motivation, what was motivating David here, was the sustenance of life, was protecting the innocent, the priests protecting. He was, by keeping them in the dark about the situation, he was giving them what people call plausible deniability. They don't know. They can't be held responsible for what they didn't know. This was not self-seeking as much as it was seeking to protect everyone else and making sure that his men are fed. Someone could say, so David lied, but what was his motivation, right? Doeg, the Edomite, on the other hand, told a true statement. He shared that he saw David at Ahimelech's home. He told the truth. Not because he was interested in truth, not because he was interested in righteousness, but because he was interested in self-promotion. This was his opportunity. This was his opportunity to be like, hello, to suddenly become somebody important to the king. And he was willing to bring about the destruction of 85 priests, as well as the women, children, etc., all of them, for his own self-exaltation, all under the guise of, like what? Someone could say, I just told the truth. I just told the truth. David lied, and Doeg told the truth. And so here in Psalm 52, it talks about one whose tongue plots destruction like a sharp razor, working deceit, betrayal. The word for deceit here can also be understood to be betrayal. Verse 5 comes to the issue to the internal issue. Verses 5 and 6. It says, you love evil more than you love good, instead of good. You love evil more than you love good. You love lying rather than speaking righteousness, rather than words of righteousness. Verse 6, you love only devouring words, or the word for devouring here is the word balal, which has to do with almost like erasing. It's a word that could be used, words that kind of eat away, like cancer, that operate like a cancer. It's where we get the word Belial, is a word for Satan, the one who tries to rub away your identity. You love only these words of Belial, of slandering, erasing, devouring words, O treacherous tongue. Right, so the issue with this mighty one that's being addressed at the beginning is more than his words. It has to do with the affection of his heart. He loves evil. And so he loves lying. He loves betrayal. You know that even the commandment is, in the Ten Commandments, is don't bear false witness against your neighbor. But he's using his words to bring destruction. And his motivation behind his true words that can be technically religiously right, but his motives are not right. Right? And instead of loving God with all his heart, soul, mind, and strength, this one loves evil, and he loves words that harm. And it can be easy to convince yourself based on, well, I'm sure I've shared this story in the past. You know, years ago when I remember I was in college, and I was spending time with one of my friends, and who had to go to choir practice one afternoon, and it was like, well, I don't want to go to choir practice. And I go, well, you can just tell them, choir practice was this afternoon, and then there was my cousin's birthday party, and you can tell those true statements. I was 19 at the time. And the Holy Spirit convicted me because those were two true statements, but they weren't missing choir practice because of the birthday party. They weren't going to the birthday party. They were just saying two true statements, but effectively deceiving. I was coaching this person on how to deceive. And the Holy Spirit convicted me of what I was doing there. But legalistic righteousness can find a way to get what you want under the guise of, well, I told two true statements, but you deceived. You can fool yourself all day long, but you're going to stand before the Lord, and he's going to look at the motivation of your heart. So here, Doeg may have told true statements, but this mighty one, but his heart's affection is he loves evil. He loves betrayal. Verse 7 says, God will pull you down forever and snatch you, rip you out of your tent. He will tear you from your tent and uproot you from the land of the living. Selah. Right? So verse 7 now, the first few verses here, the subject was addressed to O Mighty One. Verse 7, the subject changes to the Lord. God is going to deal with you. Like, you're not going to get away with this. God's verdict is sure. He will remove you from your dwelling place. He will remove you from your tent, from your community, from that in which you are rooted. He will uproot you, and he will remove you from the land of the living. Right, the way that you're walking leads to oblivion. Verse 8 says, "Then the righteous will see and fear and laugh at him." Now, the first part of this, now it begins to turn to the righteous. So the opening deals with the mighty one who loves evil. And then the middle deals with what God's going to do. And then now these final verses deal with the righteous. The subject is the righteous ones. The downfall of the mighty one becomes not just judgment, but it becomes a lesson. The righteous will see what's happening, and they will fear. It's not that the righteous are afraid in the way we're afraid of like a terrorist. It's that they have a deep respect for the way God has structured life and the accountability that's part of that structure. So the righteous see and they they learn from the way of this mighty one who will ultimately bear the consequences of what he's done. And when it says, and you'll laugh at him, the righteous will laugh at him, that can seem cold, but it's in the same sense that the Lord himself, where he laughs, where the wicked rises up thinking they're going to get away with all of this, thinking that they can do such wickedness and that they will not be held accountable. We read time and time again where the Lord himself, it talks about the Lord laughing at him. Psalm 2 verses 3 and 4. The nations have conspired together to come against the Holy One of the Lord. And it says, let's rip their chains apart and throw their ropes off. Verse 4, he who sits in heaven laughs. Adonai mocks them. Psalm 37 verses 12 and 13. The wicked plots against the righteous and gnashes at him with his teeth. The Lord laughs at him, for he sees his day is coming. And that laughter is just like, what are you doing? What are you doing? What do you think you're going to get away with? Psalm 59, 9 and 10. But you, Adonai, are laughing at them. You scoff at all the nations. O my strength, I watch for you, for God is my strong tower. So the righteous will see and fear the Lord and will have the perspective of the Lord, where they can look and not be afraid of the wicked one who rises up and does this kinds of destruction, but can know that the Lord will deal with this, and there will be vindication. And here's verse 9 tells us with clarity kind of the thought process of the righteous one. And it says, behold, or hear, but behold, hine, the man who did not make God his stronghold. Instead, he trusted or placed his faith, his confidence in the greatness of his riches, and was strong in his evil desire, right? He was seeking refuge finding strength in his evil desire, in his destruction. That closing of that verse, back in verse 4, when it said, your tongue plots destruction, it's that word destruction is the same word that's used here of evil desire. His strength is, he finds his strength in this destruction that he's calculating. The reason for the laughter is that the mighty one has trusted in things that he's acquired. He's trusted in his riches instead of placing his confidence in God. The mighty one has spoken arrogantly because he believed he needed nothing, that he had everything he needed. But what the righteous know is that his tent is unstable. It's set on unstable sand, that it will be removed. So at this point, the psalm could end here, right? The story has been told, there's been judgment, and you know, so the righteous one will see and will laugh and will understand this is what happens to the guy that doesn't make God his stronghold. He trusted his riches, and he was looking for strength, for refuge in his works of destruction or his evil desire. But the psalm continues in a couple of verses, portraying the life of the righteous, comparing. You have the hurtful, self-centered life of this mighty one, right? And now these words in verses 10 and 11 come in as words of refreshing, right? That the way of righteousness is the way of bounty and trust and praise, right? The way of walking with God couldn't be more different. Verse 10 says, Va'ani, but as for me, but I am like an olive tree flourishing in the house of God. So David now recognizes that he's walking the way of righteousness, and the Lord will sustain him. I'm like an olive tree flourishing in the house of God. My confidence, my trust is in God's chesed forever and ever, in his covenant loyalty, in his covenant love. You can, when you look at the stories, we do see David in the story that we've read in 1 Samuel 21 and 22, that soon after, David is with his mighty men, of malcontents, in hiding in the cave, and there come occasions where he has an opportunity to kill Saul himself. Two occasions where he could kill Saul, and he doesn't because of what is in his heart. So someone on a religious technicality could be like, David lied, right? David's heart was not for destruction. David was protecting the priest and these priests. David was concerned taking care of his men. His motivation was that. And people can get hung up on these little technicalities while missing the heart, and they could say Doeg the Edomite told the truth, but his motivation was wicked. Right? Legalism misses the heart of the matter. And so that's where we have to always did those who hid the Jews from the Nazis, those who hid them and said, no, there are none here, when they told that lie, were they sinning? Right? No, they were. I don't believe they were sinning. They were protecting life. They were protecting. Their motivation was to protect life. Their motivation was pure. Again, this can strike at the hearts, coming to be like, boy, you're being super, you're making things real. I like black and white, clean lines. That lying is always wrong. Telling an untrue statement is always wrong. And telling the true statement is always right, and you like that nice, clean, but that misses the heart of the matter. Even when Yeshua refers back to this story, there's no condemnation of what David did in that case. He points basically to the Pharisees who are missing the heart of Shabbat, in the same way someone could miss the heart of what's happening with David versus Doeg. Psalm 52 brings greater clarity to that. David is the one who is like an olive tree flourishing in the house of God, trusting in God's character, in his love, forever and ever. He says, I will praise you forever for what you have done. I will put my hope, I will expectantly wait upon your name, because it is good in the presence of your chesed ones, your loved ones, your kedoshim, but your loved ones. So this is where words matter, but the heart behind those words. Search me and know me. Search my heart and know my heart. That God has called us to be people who are truly righteous in the depth of our being, that we're in pursuit of what he's in pursuit of, that he is a God who pursues life and holiness and purity, that he is a God who wants us to walk according to his ways. And we don't want to get distracted by focusing on a religious righteousness, but to say, Lord, search my heart. Let there be a real righteousness within me. I want to walk in your ways. Again, I know, depending on kind of what your background is, what I'm talking about here can be like, well, you're getting super, you're making me uncomfortable. We're not talking about just coming up with excuses to lie for selfish reasons, but to understand that that what God wants us to do is protect life and to walk in His ways, and to be concerned with what He's concerned about. And that the one here who is described as the deceiver is not David, who told an untrue statement, but the one who told a technically true statement is the one who is the deceiver, because he doesn't love righteousness, while David loves righteousness. He loves the Lord. He loves God's love, and that's what he's in pursuit of. And that shows again in the way that he handles Saul afterward. His motives are for life. He doesn't take Saul's life. He says, that's the Lord's business. I'm not going to touch the Lord's anointed. So let's continue to lay our hearts before the Lord. Say, Lord, I don't want to get hindered by a legalistic view of righteousness. I want to know your heart and walk in true, real righteousness that pleases you, that's pure before you. Amen? Just meditate on that today. If it struck you a little bit funny, I pray that you'll grasp the heart of what I'm saying here. All right, well, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Shalom, shalom. Have a beautiful day.